So I'm back today to interview the author Benjamin Moser. Benjamin, hello, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to be here in your beautiful home in Utrecht in the Netherlands. I guess the first question that I'm very curious about to know before we talk about your brilliant biographies is how did you end up in this lovely town of Utrecht in this beautiful home?
Well, I've been here now 20 years. I came here because I was living in New York. I was working at a publishing house, Knopf, and I was 21 when I started working there. And when I was 23, an author, a Dutch author, came to have lunch with my boss. His name was Arthur Japin. And and 22 years later, we're still together. and
Here in Utrecht.
Dutch. And and I was a kid and I thought it was kind of fun to move to Utrecht. And I didn't realize I'd spend now almost half my life here.
Wow. That's quite a big move from New York City, the Big Apple, to Utrecht, a completely different environment. I'm wondering how that might have impacted your writing and the way you look at writing.
Well, I moved to London first because I thought that was a little bit less of a traumatic
a transition.
transition. And then I realized that London you can do it as you've done today. It's easy to come. It's a little bit too far to have a relationship. You actually, at a certain point, you have to make that decision. Making that decision was also a decision to do something that I had wanted to do, which was try to be a writer and try to do it outside of New York and London, which a friend of mine said to me a couple of years ago that no one's written a good book in New York in 50 years. And I thought, come on, that can't be possible, But then I started sort of scrolling down my mental database and I thought, no, everybody does actually leave because it's too hard to live in these big cities. Too much of a distraction, too much competition, too expensive, too much cultural harassment. You have to go to this show or this movie and read this piece and blah, blah, blah. You live over here, you don't even know that's happening. Mm-hmm. You kind of do. Of course, we do have the internet, but it just feels a lot calmer. And I think the trick has been for me to keep it that way. People of our generation, who are the first generation for which this was true, we could live in New Delhi or in Singapore or in Utrecht and pretend like we were in New York because we're just with the communication is so instant. You're just as connected. I mean, why live in Brooklyn if you live in, Kuala Lumpur? But that's a false intimacy. I mean, that's a false thing. And in fact, I think the trick is to keep it foreign, to keep yourself far away, to keep yourself in that position that at least I consciously took up as an American who fit in really, really well into America. It's not so great to fit in too well. You know this about any country. I mean, because I know your background a little bit, but like French people who fit in really well to Paris are usually bores, right? Yeah. I mean, the world is made by people who leave. I guess I sensed that. At the same time, it was just a personal decision.
Well, I mean, you've obviously been very productive here in Utrecht because you bring a number of books, including two biographies that we're going to talk about today. Why This World, your biography of Clarice Lispector, which was published in 2009.
Yeah.
You've also published another book we're going to talk about today, Sontag, Her Life, about Susan Sontag, for which you won the Pulitzer Prize in 2020. And you're also, as I understand, you've been named the translator of the entire works of Clarice Lispector from Portuguese into English. So,
I coordinate that project, and some of them I translate as well.
Awesome. Fantastic. I guess the first question, to try and connect a little bit these two books, there are numerous similarities when one reads about Clarice Lispector and Susan Sontag. You can enumerate a lot of them. They're both quite strong women. They're both women that somewhat alienated people around them at certain stages of their lives. How did those similarities have an impact, if at all, on writing these books? Did it make it easier to slip into the persona of Susan Sontag, I guess, because that was the second book?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they are similar in the sense they're roughly the same generation. Clarice is 13 years older. Mm-hmm. They're both Jewish. They're both women. I mean, these are like
Both strong women.
Yeah, well, if they're not, you don't really end up writing a biography about them because they don't manage to be these kinds of huge figures. They were both writers, I mean, of course, a lot of people are women, a lot of people are Jewish, a lot of people are whatever, a lot of people are Brazilian or American. This doesn't necessarily mean that much. But being a woman writer and being a woman intellectual does, as it turns out. That's not why I started doing it. I think I was really fascinated by this world of these great intellectual women. Because when I started off with Clarice, she's so famous in Brazil, and I sort of thought, why is she not more read in the rest of the world? So that was sort of what I was approaching. But as you go into it, you realize that even the very famous women writers or intellectuals, they're not that well known. I mean, people have heard of them, and they might have read them because they had something on a, school book list. That's definitely the case of Clarice in Brazil. You basically have to read something by her to graduate from high school. But that doesn't actually mean that people really know who she was or really read her or really understand her. I mean, in the case of Brazil, they do, at least among people who care about books and culture and art. Of course they do. But I kind of got an idea that the world of these great intellectual women was pretty much unknown, even though the names were known, the faces were known, but really what they were up against and what they were actually doing and how different the world was when they were around. This was before this whatever wave we're having now of feminism had started. When I think in my generation, when I was growing up, there was an assumption that certainly in families like mine, I'm sure like yours, that, in great contrast to my parents' generation, my sister would have the same education I did. If she wanted to become a doctor, she could become a doctor. If she wanted to become a pilot, she could become a pilot. I mean, this was so taken for granted by my generation that I think we really didn't remember how recently, I mean, even my mother's generation, she was encouraged to go to a sort of mediocre college. Her brothers, they had to go to a good college. That was important. But she was a girl, so it didn't really matter. I mean, that seemed really exotic to me when I was growing up. And certainly that's not how my parents raised their daughter or how my sister would raise her daughter. So I thought there was a lot of opportunity to mystify this in a certain way and show just how different the world had been and how much in some ways that makes their accomplishments all the more resonant. But I didn't start it with any sort of feminist agenda or anything.
So you, in a way, you spotted an opportunity to add some visibility to an author that you felt had maybe been neglected outside of her.
Yeah. Well, for Clarice, I mean, that was so painful really for me, just to see how misunderstood she'd been and how just really ignored she'd been outside of Brazil. It was an opportunity. I thought it was an opportunity. But again, coming back to this thing about living in New York or London, everybody thinks, why the hell are you doing this? Like you're 25. Like, why are you wasting your time on this dead Brazilian lady? Everybody's on the make. Everybody's making a career. And usually what a lot of people do, especially in the early years of a writing career, and I think it's why people by my age don't have a writing career. If you've been at this for 25 years, a lot of the people that seemed promising when I started out aren't around anymore. And I think it's because there's so much pressure to conform. And there's so much pressure to do the same things that everybody else does. But the thing is, readers don't want the same thing everybody else does. But, I remember really being almost mocked for doing this. It was not fun.
And did you feel that, therefore, the opportunity was in this anti-conformism that this would allow you to stand out because she was a dead Brazilian lady that nobody had heard of, but this would make
but not because I was trying to make some canny market choice. I wasn't. It was just because that was really fascinating to me. And I was scared. I don't think I thought, wow, I'm so smart doing this. I thought maybe they're right and this is really stupid because in fact, and I got paid $8,000 for this book that I worked 5 years on.
Wow.
That was a book that, was done on American Express. But I think that if I'm looking back now, and I talk about myself sometimes this way because I'm a biographer, it's kind of a occupational hazard, is that I sort of also, because I'm always looking at other people's lives in this kind of, why did she move to Paris? And should she have broken up with her girlfriend or whatever, these kind of ways that you start looking as a biographer, I kind of apply that to myself too. So looking back, I can think, actually, it was a very good decision to do something different. But it wasn't really, it was just because I wanted to do it and I felt it was important. And I wasn't going to give up my life in, publishing, which was, I don't know how secure it would have been, but I was doing all right, as a young person. And I was interested in it. But why would I give it up just to do something boring that anybody else could do? I mean, that wasn't the point.
Right. Clarice Lispector is not necessarily an easy author. Her books don't obviously seem commercial. And we'll talk a little bit about the challenges of the translation work you probably went through, because she's considered to be a hard author to translate. I think in the introduction, and you mentioned that translators are often a little bit bemused by her style. And she was often very irritated by what she perceived as mistakes. There's a lot of pride in her books, though, in Brazil. So how did this difficult author, who might not appear that commercial to begin with, how did she become so popular in Brazil? I keep wanting to say her native country, but it wasn't her native country.
She was, in fact, born in Ukraine.
Yeah, she was originally from Ukraine.
All the more terrifying to think about now. I mean, fled under very similar circumstances.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, she died in 1977, and she was basically known to the usual suspects, writers, intellectuals, and artists in Rio, in Sao Paulo. That was about it. I mean, she was not a household name by any means, but she was a genius. And I think that a lot of writers or artists, and this is a very common story, actually, is that they're ahead of their time. Whether it's, here we are in Holland, whether it's Vincent van Gogh, there's all these cases of writers and artists that maybe they just need a little time to get to be understood. And then once they are, this is the weird nature of some sort of historical progress, if you want to say. But once they are, they infiltrate the national consciousness with the consciousness of a language so much that you can't imagine the world without them. This is certainly the case of a lot of painters. It's the case of a lot of musicians, but it needs some time. And so it was something that did take time, and it was the work of lots of publishers and teachers and other writers and critics, and a lot of actresses actually played an important role in this because they took her stories around because she's such a magnetic character and everybody wants to play her. And so it's something that she built after she died. And she, in fact, said that she would keep writing after she died. And in a way she has. I mean, her name and her work have grown to this stature that it's really hard to compare with any other writer in a different country. Because they say, oh, who was the, Spanish Clarice Lispector, the Polish Clarice Lispector? And it's really hard to describe because the emotions that she evokes are so powerful.
Mm-hmm. To come back to the translation issues, you've translated a number of her works. I think the copy of Hour of the Star that I read was translated by you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So I'm fascinated by translation in a way because we both, and you and I, speak multiple languages.
Right.
And I sometimes, when I'm reading, for example, a French book translated in English, which is very rare, I think to myself, well, there's some context missing. There's some cultural references missing. And no matter how good it is, there's going to be something missing. How do you capture as much as you can? Can you capture everything when you're translating? And especially with an author like Clarice Lispector, who's very difficult.
Yeah. Well, she's difficult for Brazilians as well. That's something that was a huge excitement to me when I realized this. In a way, it's almost like looking at a Cubist painting. You see what it is, but you don't really see how it all fits together. And so grammatically, if you're interested in grammar, and you're a French speaker, so I mean, they've beaten this out of the French after 500 years of tyrannical schooling. But in a Latin language, in a dialect of Latin, you don't have the cases anymore that you have in Latin, but you do have the echo of them. And so, in fact, the language is a bit more plastic than English is. You can move things around more. Because in Latin, it doesn't matter where you put the phrase because the case is indicated. She seems to have instinctively picked up on this possibility in Portuguese. So things get moved around all the time. Words are used in ways that are completely unexpected because of the juxtaposition of, where it is, what word it's next to in the sentence. So it's hard. And Brazilians, they read her because she's such a great writer and she's so famous and, everybody's read her, that she sounds less and less strange now. But as a translator, you go in there and you think, this is not actually the the normal.
Technically correct.
It's not that she, some writers who invent crazy words or who use a lot of weird dialect, it's nothing like that. It's really a lot about just where the words are in the sentence. Mm-hmm. And it sounds fractured and broken up, but it's also the poetic beauty of it. Because you can break up a sentence and move things around and just sound like an idiot. Or you can sound like a genius. Mm-hmm. So I've been coordinating this project for almost 20 years now with New Directions and with Penguin in the UK to translate her complete works into English. And it's been really a fabulously successful project. I mean, she's being read all over the world because once something is in English, it also then gets read, for example, in Romania. I just got an email saying the book that we did in English first, even before it was published in Brazil, it was her complete stories. Mm-hmm. We brought all her stories together in one volume for the first time in chronological order.
You really reawakened at an international level, not just of the English-speaking world, a great interest in Clarice Lispector.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working at it for 20 years, really day and night. And then maybe not day and night, but every day I do something for that cause somewhere in the world. It can be in South Korea, it can be in South Africa, it can be in South Texas, anywhere. And that's been just really fun more than anything to see that she's now in the position that she deserves to be in. But the translation's hard. I have figured out how to do it. I think, the reviews are the reviews. And so it's not just me bragging at this point. We've done something like 15 volumes of her work. Mm-hmm. What I try to do is just keep as close to the Portuguese as possible. Mm-hmm. Because the natural, obvious temptation is to move things back and around to where they should be.
Of course.
If she says, in the chair is Charles, then it's pretty easy to say Charles is in the chair. Mm-hmm. But then you lose the whole thing. It's not wrong on a technical level, but you lose all the soul. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of my job, and especially editing other people's work, is just moving it back, putting the weird comma in there that doesn't really need to be there. Actually, that works better. I think it's just easier.
Mm-hmm. How much of that, I like the word you just used, how much of that soul comes from her genius, and how much might be ascribed to her Ukrainian origins and presumably having another language in her head. And as you write in the biography, she often had to confront people thinking that she wasn't Brazilian. She often had to justify her Brazilianness. So how much of that twist in the language came from those Ukrainian origins?
Well, I think a lot. And when we say Ukrainian now, you mean a citizen of the Republic of Ukraine, right? Yeah. And in that day, she was not actually Ukrainian. Mm-hmm. She was actually a Russian Jew. She was one of the many, many, many nationalities that made up this huge empire. Ukrainians are one people, Poles are one people, Jews are another people, Armenians are another people, Romanians are another people. They all lived under this tyranny. Mm-hmm. So she was born in Ukraine. That's a kind of nuance that maybe doesn't matter at this point. But her language was not Ukrainian. Her language was Yiddish, her parents' language. Mm-hmm. And their religion was Jewish, and which means something very terrifying in that context, which is, that they were constantly exposed to pogroms and to religious persecution, to racial warfare and violence. Her grandfather was murdered. Her mother was raped. Her whole family was exiled to Brazil. They weren't just immigrants, they were people who they had to go to Brazil because they would have died. Mm-hmm. It wasn't an immigration in the way that we often think of it. Mm-hmm. They were refugees. And so her parents never spoke Portuguese, and she grew up with this other language. And there was always a question about where she was really from. But first of all, she looked very strange in the Brazilian context. She was very tall and she was blonde, which already is, a very small minority of Brazilian women. And she also talked weird. Like she had a French in Portuguese, which does have that but also has a and she couldn't say the She sounded weird. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just that people, there's a few recordings of her voice, and they're kind of fascinating because she sounds so strange. So it was a natural question. But of course, she grew up in Brazil. She was there from the time she was a year old. Portuguese wasn't a natural, inevitable language for her. She could have just as gone to Buenos Aires or to Philadelphia or to Toronto, like a lot of people did from her background.
Mm-hmm. So talking of languages, I read, and I'm not sure how accurate this is, that you originally were studying Chinese at university, and then you switched to Portuguese, which seems to have launched you on this brilliant trajectory of writing about Clarice Lispector and translating her works. I'm curious to know what was the origin of that change. You ever visualize yourself as the biographer and translator of a great Chinese author in an alternative universe, or what?
Yeah, so this is my like biographer's mind. You know, I'm like, what if you hadn't gone to Yale, but you went to Columbia? Or what if you hadn't married so-and-so, you married so-and-so? I mean, this is like how biographers always think. So I went to high school in France, partially, as I told you, and I had lived in Europe, and I also spoke Spanish for other reasons. And I thought, okay, I mean, I have enough European background. I'm really interested in Asia. I don't know anything about Asia. So I'm going to do Chinese. And this was in the years not right after Tiananmen Square, but it was sort of the time when China felt like it was this big thing, which it was opening up, and everybody was going there, and seemed really exciting and interesting. And I was just bad at Chinese. I mean, I don't know how to do it.
Okay.
I was so bad at it.
It's a hard language, I'm sure.
It was hard. I mean, other languages are hard too, because I always think, oh, I learned all the easy languages. But actually, then I see other people trying to speak them. And I think, oh, actually, it is hard to speak Dutch. I mean, not for me, but it was for a lot of people. I just went into Portuguese class because I wanted to take a language, and it was at 10:30 in the morning. I think it was like maybe 11. I mean, it was something like that. It was like some stupid idea like that. And I thought,
Clarice Lispector fans around the world are grateful for scheduling with your university courses.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, that was the only reason. And I thought, well, I know Spanish and French, so how hard can Portuguese be? And as it turned out, it's not that hard. I always say it's the same thing. I was just in Italy, and a friend called me from Lisbon, and I speak Italian. Well, I mean, everybody can understand me. It's not terrible. It's not great either. It's basically like French with an Italian accent, which everybody kind of gets,
That's how I blag it.
Yeah. No, I mean, you just kind of, and then if you don't know the word, you say it in Spanish and they understand. But I don't really speak proper Italian. I have this idea, I would say, oh, it's all the same thing. But then I was speaking in Portuguese, and I realized it's really, really different. I mean, it is the same basis. It's not as different as, Hindi, but it is different. And I just picked it up really quickly after a year. I could speak it. And then I went to Brazil. And then once you go to Brazil, then you're in. And that happens to a lot of people that go to Brazil. I mean, Brazil is sort of far away from a lot of people's perspective, and it's not really a place that quote unquote everybody goes to. But everybody who does go there gets sucked in. Have you been there?
I have 20 years ago.
Yeah, you didn't get sucked in.
I did get sucked in. Yeah, okay. I liked it. I really enjoyed Rio, and I really enjoyed Brasilia, actually.
Oh, really?
I went there for a day, and
that's enough.
It is enough. Yeah.
Oh, okay. You really enjoyed Brazil. I was like, because I don't know. Brasilia to me is like, it just like gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Oh, really? Okay.
I'm for one day
by the scale of the project.
The scale is, if you like totalitarian architecture.
Yeah. I just said Brasilia because. Obviously, I loved Salvador. I loved Rio.
Yeah, well, that's more.
I loved Florianopolis. And all these other places. But when you say you love Brasilia, it stands out a bit more.
It does, because everybody else is. Well, I mean, people from there like it. That's something that I find sort of fascinating. Apparently, it's a nice place to grow up.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of more like kind of what a lot of foreigners think of as the sort of excitement of Brazil. It has none of that. But for Brazilians, the excitement of Brazil is not that great. It's like traffic and drama and crime and all that.
Yeah.
And Brasilia doesn't really have as much of that.
No, it's very quiet. It's very quiet. After writing Why This World, this biography named Clarice Lispector, you were approached to write the book on Susan Sontag. I'd love to hear about that selection process, because obviously now Susan Sontag is much more of a household name, let's say, in the U.S. and abroad. Clearly a high priestess of intellectuals and culture, and so it must be quite a daunting challenge. How did that all happen? How did you set your sights on tackling that?
Well, I didn't set my sights on her. She set her sights on me. I was in Rio, actually. I just got an email from somebody. So you said the selection. I mean, I didn't know that anyone was looking for a biography of Susan Sontag, and I certainly probably would not have put myself forward, because I did my first book just because I wanted to do it. I didn't do it because somebody asked me to. And, to the contrary, people were telling me not to do it. And I liked that side of, being independent and doing my own thing. But the opportunity to do Sontag was so exciting. Also because, I've lived here for a long time. I spent a lot of that time in Brazil working on the Clarice book and other things. And then to have that opportunity to go back to my own country was exciting. And that I also suspected, and I was right about this, even though I didn't know that much about Sontag, compared to what you know after you do a 900-page biography. You can't even think back to like how little you knew compared to that.
Nothing.
I guess I was hesitant in a way also because it was, I knew enough to know that she was a very electric topic, and that a lot of people had huge investments in her legacy. And oftentimes when you have people that have huge investments in a legacy and there's a lot of conflict around it, what happens is the person just dies because people think, this is true of a famous Brazilian writer who I won't name, but, well, I could name him, João Guimarães, who's a famous writer who died in 1966. And ever since then, so this has been 60 years, no one's done a biography of him because it was too complex legally and all these things. You don't want to spend all these years just to get sued. And what happens is the work disappears. With Sontag, I knew those dangers were there, but I also knew that the potential rewards of like having her work come alive again were outweighed that.
What a daunting research process you must have gone through. Can you take us a little bit through that? What were some of the major challenges you might have faced?
Well, I like research. I love an archive. I mean, give me a 500-foot table with a bunch of files on it. Like, I'm your guy. I love it. You know, I'm a researcher. I have a good memory. Maybe this is related to studying languages as well, but I'm good at seeing connections. You can't really learn languages unless you know that table is the same thing as table. Just to give
the simplest,
very simple. I love that stuff. I actually love interviewing people. And I love meeting people. I was really close to both of my grandmothers. I was the kind of kid who was like, tell us about World War II. Or I'm sort of still like that. Like, I still like hearing about people's lives. And one of the things that's really interesting is that you realize how few people actually, nobody even ever asks them anything about themselves. People love being interviewed. For me, that has two sides to it. Professional interviews are one thing. Personal interviews are a different thing. Tell me about your relationship with your mother. That's the thing that nobody really ever asks. And so even very, very famous people, I learned this the first time when I was doing the Clarice book, that all these people that were, you know, the Minister of Foreign Affairs or the famous singer or the whatever, these are people that get interviewed like every day and nobody ever asks them anything. No, they get asked the same question.
I see.
Like, oh, you know, you have a new album, Caetano Veloso or whoever, you know, what was the inspiration? He says, well, you know, I was sitting in my hammock on the beach in Bahia and blah, blah. I mean, and then you say that 500 times. It's surprisingly rare. How do you ask about sex or about money or about cancer? Or about, I said, well, actually, that's what people want to talk about. Sex, your parents, your children, all that stuff. That's actually what people want to talk about. In any life, those are the important things.
And yet one feels that with the personality that at least I detected in Susan Sontag, that I detected in your biography, I would have imagined there would be a certain level of defensiveness from people you might be interviewing, that they might put up certain walls. They might not want to divulge.
I mean, they lie. That's a different thing.
Oh, really?
Oh, my God.
So it's part of your job, detecting the bullshit and sort of triaging the...
No, I love it. I go right into it. No, the bullshit's important. People don't lie about stuff they don't care about. People lie about the things they care about. And I've learned this with Clarice, is that she always lied about her age. And because she's this pretty Brazilian woman, people thought, oh, she's just this silly blonde lady she's 80, but she's still saying she's 39. Ha ha. You know, I mean, there are a lot of women in Brazil who do that and everywhere else. But I thought, this is weird. She's not that kind of person. She's so honest in these books that it almost makes you vomit. I mean, it's so strong. The honesty, it's like such a silly little thing for her to lie about. So I figured out why she was lying about that and how important that was. And of course, it was much more dramatic. I mean, money is always an interesting one. Different people lie about money. They don't lie about it if they don't care about it, which means that rich people usually don't lie about it. It's like aspirational people who lie about it. Sex is kind of similar. Like people who don't have a problem getting laid, they'll tell you. It's people who are trying to pretend like, and then you're like, well, why are you trying to pretend this? And it usually comes back to some failure. You know, they feel like they should have had more sex, or they should have had more money, or they should have been more successful professionally, or they should have had a better relationship with their mother. And then once you kind of lean into that a little bit, that's when real revelations happen and something breaks down in people. It's an interesting process to watch. And usually, I mean, you don't have to be a dick about it. You know, you can say like, I mean, you don't have to be tactless or rude, but you can just kind of dig into it. And usually people, well, I mean, I don't want to say this for everyone, because certainly people I've interviewed don't like me, which is inevitable. We've interviewed thousands of people. But people will often really thank you for listening to them. And people will write you, and sometimes you even become kind of a therapist. Like with Sontag, there was a lot of that because she was so mean to certain people. And it traumatized them because they loved her, you know, and they're like, why was she such a bitch at that party in 1967? And you're like, I don't know. Like, I mean, but then you say, well, maybe it's because actually in 1967, that's when she was ill, or her book had just gotten terrible reviews. And it's weird that you can sort of like help people millions of years after something happened to somebody you've never met.
Because one of the similarities, we're talking about connection between the two, is they do come off, both of them, as difficult women, difficult characters. I mean, by the end of her life, Clarice Lispector was alienating a lot of people and behaving in ways which were not necessarily...
Well, she was a lot better than Susan.
Well, so, and then you went to another level with Susan Sontag, where really are dealing with somebody incredibly difficult. So that must have drawn out a lot of emotion in people that you were interviewing. I mean, like you said, people were saying, why was she such a bitch?
Yeah. As Terry Castle said, she was really, really mean. I mean... Clarice, I think, toward the end of her life was just ill. You know, she died at 56. So, and she had cancer, and when she was 46, she had this terrible accident where her hand almost got amputated. I mean, it's this terrible fire. Sontag, though, it's interesting. All of her personality flaws are there from the beginning. And the reason you know that is because she writes them down. And she herself is very, very self-analytical. And she realizes, she says, like, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't have said that, I shouldn't have done this, and all these things that refer in her life. But it is interesting, at a certain moment, she kind of snaps. She didn't tip the waiter because she didn't like her appetizer. Becomes, she yelled at the waiter and told him to fuck himself. And you think, it's weird. You know, you think, that's not normal. A lot of people, you know, are in a bad mood sometimes, or, I mean, this can happen. This happens to me. It happens to you, maybe not. I mean, you seem like a very civilized person, but sometimes...
Oh, he should see me on a bad day.
Yeah. I mean, listen, you all have bad days.
If you wrote my biography, I wonder what...
No, exactly. So you're like, oh, okay, like his ex-girlfriend doesn't have great things to say about him from when he was 21. This isn't such a big deal. This is, you know, anybody. You could say this about anybody. But Sontag's personality, you do feel like it kind of snaps in a certain way. And so for a biographer, it's kind of like a lie. You kind of have to figure out what happened.
Susan Sontag, to be very honest, I knew her name. I had read Notes on Camp. I guess I didn't realize how much of a huge impact she had on American public intellectual life and American culture.
Everybody read Notes on Camp in college.
Yeah.
Everybody like knew who she was. She had the white streak in her hair and all that. That was what I felt was really exciting about the ability to try to bring her back to life and try to get people reading and talking about her, because it's kind of hard to explain a lot of the stuff that she was involved with. But if you understand it, you understand most of the 20th century in this one figure. And that's really rare. I mean, most writers, even really excellent writers, they don't do as much as she did. They don't have time.
Well, she worked like crazy.
She worked like crazy. She didn't sleep either. She was incredibly energetic, and she did so much stuff in so many areas. So that was kind of, I guess, why I got excited about it. I thought I can tell a whole panorama of 20th century life.
In a way, can you say that Susan Sontag popularized intellectual life in America, brought it to the forefront, and transformed it almost in a way like Andy Warhol might have transformed the relationship of society with art?
Well, America, I don't know how long you've spent there in your life.
I lived there for 5 years.
All right. Well, you get it. I mean, because it's a country that's so present. it just depends. I mean, if you're coming from a Canadian background, it's different. If you're coming from a French background, or coming from a Latin American background. But the fact is, it's not a country that has famous intellectuals. Never. The French love these people. They're usually really stupid when you meet them. Have that experience?
No, I've never had that experience.
Oh my God, they're depressing. A lot of them. I mean, some of them are actually quite brilliant, but a lot of the people who pass for intellectuals in France are like complete barbarians. You think, you've got to be.
This is the person leading.
This is the guy
intellectual
who's telling me what I should read.
Wow.
Did you go to school in France?
I did when I was a kid.
Yeah. I mean, you know that like there's a French way of sounding smart, which is even in the grammar. There's a way that you're taught to say something about la Madeleine de Proust or something.
Right.
People are sort of flattered that they... And if you're kind of good at cobbling together a bunch of received ideas, you can sound like a smart person in French, even though you're totally ignorant and a complete blank slate. But they do, at least, for better or worse. There is a space on television. There's a space in the popular newspapers. There was. I mean, it's less and less. When you look at Le Monde now, it's like one book page every 6 months. But that did not used to be the case. I mean, it really did used to be the case that people know their way was poet was.
A big space for public discourse.
Yes, people were like impressed by your book on the Rabelais or something. Like nobody in America, I'm from Texas, nobody in America was impressed by that. They hadn't, it's not that they were against it, which is what some Europeans think. It's that they'd never actually heard of it. And actually, if you talk to them about it, they'd think it was kind of cool. But Sontag becomes this figure in this country that doesn't have a space for that figure. New York has a space for that figure. And New York's very competitive in that sense because everybody wants to be that one person that, you know, has an opinion about Renaissance art. And somehow it's kind of a miracle that that person becomes famous and gets to be in, I mean, I'm not even saying like be on television. It's like be
visible.
Yeah, no, like have like talk to a bookstore with 8 people. And this is in America, like this is great for intellectuals. But how did Sontag do that? I was totally fascinated by it. And I think part of the solution is that she grew up in Hollywood. People didn't really think about that.
You think that growing up in that mecca of storytelling it allowed her to have
places
where communicate more effectively? Is that right?
Yeah. Well, because Hollywood, I mean, her mother and grandmother moved to Hollywood around the time of the First World War, when it was just starting. You know, she writes about this. It taught you how to smoke. It taught you how to wear a raincoat. It taught you how to do this. And Sontag was fascinated by that. She was fascinated by gestures and words and those sort of things in the way a great actress would be. And then she put that into her writing and into her public persona. It's really interesting. I mean, it's really, that's why I sort of think that this figure that she creates of Susan Sontag in quotes, it's this incredible artistic creation. It was something nobody had ever done in America before. And everybody tried and said, no, they're all trying. I've met hundreds of these people who are going to be the next Susan Sontag. So it brings you back to this mystery of charisma, I think. She had something that it was more than the sum of the parts.
Yeah. There was a very funny moment in your book where it was a very New York moment when they're queuing for at a nightclub and somebody says to the bouncer, we're with Susan Sontag, and that opens the doors. And amazing that this would happen in America. Yeah, we wouldn't imagine.
Can you imagine like we're with Hopi Baba or like, I don't know, who's like, I don't even, I mean, I've been gone for so long. I don't even know who like, we're friends with Judith Butler. That's going to get you into Studio 54. Like, no. But Sontag, it did. And how, you know, it's funny thing about that story is it took her by surprise too.
Right. Exactly.
She couldn't believe it. Because she was this very nerdy girl who...
Very insecure.
She'd been in this unhappy marriage. She'd been abroad for a few years. She lived in this crappy apartment, like 5 floors up. And suddenly they're whisking her past the velvet rope at Studio 54 or whatever. It wasn't Studio 54 because that's a little later, but somewhere like that. I mean, it was a mystery for her too. So the
creature she invented had almost gotten away from her.
Oh yeah, and she knew that really young. I mean, she was in her early 30s by the time, and she was very famous. And that was one of the challenges for me. It's like lies and like these other things that you look for. It's like, yeah, she wrote some good essays, definitely. She was attractive, yes. She was smart, yes. But I mean, if you've ever set foot in New York City, like, you know how many like attractive, smart, funny, good-looking, rich people there are. It's like the entire city is made up of those people. So, like, why her?
What do you think the answer is to that? Was that just that charisma, or that growing up in Hollywood, as you said? Or
well, I mean, a lot of people grow up in Hollywood. So, I mean, Los Angeles is a big city. A lot of people, and now, you know, it's even more because it doesn't have to be physically there. I don't know. I mean, I do kind of hazard some guesses. I think that it was a moment in American history where everything that she had came together, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that she was gay as well. When homosexuality was becoming glamorous in a way that, and that the society had felt repressed and conformist for the 40 or the 20 years between, say, the end of the Second World War and the assassination of Kennedy. There were all these rebellions, whether they were from blacks or from women or from homosexuals. I don't know. There was a moment, and she took it.
She was in the right time at the right place.
Yeah. I mean, that's another question for a biographer. Like, if she had published Notes on Camp in 1958 or in 1968.
Yeah. Maybe too ahead or not far ahead.
Well, in 1958, it would have been maybe too early.
And 68, nobody cares. Yeah.
Or they cared, but it was.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think Susan Sontag or Clarice Lispector would make of the biographies of Ring?
Well, Clarice's son said to me that she would have really loved me and she would have been very happy with what I'd done for her.
With lovely validation of
Yeah. I mean, you never know. And so I was telling you, I just had this picture taken of myself for my new book. And you never really look like your picture, right? Like the way you see each other, you see yourself. It's just not the way that other people see you. It's always weird. It's like hearing, you know, here I am, hearing my voice in this earphone. Whenever you hear a recording of your voice, you always sound much weirder than you think. So, you know, maybe Clarice wouldn't have liked it. Susan, I had to tell some unpleasant stories about Susan. A lot fewer than I could have. People said the other day, like, you're so hard on her. I was like, I was so nice to her. I was like, I left like 90% on the cutting room floor.
Wow.
I mean, because the fact was the last years of Susan were not pretty. You know, she was really awful to a lot of people, really hurt people.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, when you're doing a book, you're not trying to write a book about, I mean, I don't try to write a book about like the Holy Virgin Mary. I want her to be real. I want this character, like, I want you to feel like you get her. And she can do bad things, but I want you to understand why she doesn't. And the second thing that's, I think, even more important, I want her to be alive. Like, I want the guy who like went to a good school and is a reader, I want that person to be interested in her and like keep going and have her come alive and have her become a real person. So I think that if you make a person real, I mean, I think if you manage to do that, you've accomplished something. I mean, and we all know, I mean, especially not to keep talking about French, they always say it's an Anglo-Saxon biography. You know, it's an American style biography, which means it's not as boring as French biography. Because, you know, the French biographer is very much about, like, on the 6th of July, he wrote, I'll be arriving at the Gare de Lyon, you know, at 12:43. To which she responded, okay, I will send, you know,
I will send the car
event to pick you up. And, or whatever. And it's like, I mean, this has changed a lot, but I remember when I was a kid reading biographies in French, it was like so boring. And American and English biographies are more fun, and we have a tradition of that in English. But I think that one is trying to accomplish a scholarly task of maybe just assembling everything, putting it all in one place, which is hard work. I mean, I'm not trying to dismiss that because that's a huge amount of work. But the other is really about creating a character.
It's funny you mentioned that because I just read a biography of T.S. Eliot by Robert Crawford. Volume 1 was what one might call Anglo-Saxon. It was really a fantastic storytelling. You got into the skin of T.S. Eliot and you understood where he was coming from, why he would, etc. And volume 2 was very much the French style of, on this 19th of July, he had tea at the Ritz.
Right.
£12.50, it's on it. Who are your heroes in biography, writing biography?
I hesitate to mention one of them because I just read this piece in the Financial Times about the rage in Westminster for Robert Caro. Have you heard about this?
I'm a huge fan of, and I thought it was pronounced Caro, but you're
Caro.
teaching me something
Yeah.
Caro, thank you so much. I've not heard about the rage at Westminster around Robert.
Well, this is really interesting. Basically, because American politics are more exciting than British politics, a lot of the British political class, including MPs, people like this, they're more interested in the Iowa caucuses or whatever, and that they've fucked themselves up in a big way by reading Robert Caro. And I find this fascinating. It's something I often talk about in terms of translation also, is that languages are so different. Just because table means table, it's so hard to explain unless you've really lived in other languages. Just how different the brain is produced by different languages and by the fact of a different history and culture and language that people are educated and acculturated into. But it's even more dangerous, I think, among countries that speak the same language. British-American misunderstandings is a long story. Just because you know English and you prefer watching the coverage of Donald Trump in Pennsylvania doesn't mean you actually understand that. And so I was fascinated that Caro has had this huge influence. And I asked a couple of journalist friends, I was like, is that true? And he said, oh, yeah, they're all obsessed with him. So now I feel like some stupid Tory, you know.
I'm also obsessed with him, so we'll be...
Yeah, you know, because they're great. I mean, he's obsessed with them too, because he's put 50 years writing a biography of a single person.
Right. There's a movie coming out. Have you seen this?
Oh, yeah, there's a movie,
documentary on him and Bob
Gottlieb's daughter made, right?
That's right, exactly.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
I just saw the trailer, and it looks like everything one body.
I mean, that's just like the movie that was designed for, you know how like they design like fast food to target some enzyme?
Right.
They'll like mix it with
like hormone in your brain.
Yeah, like I feel like if that lab in Los Alamos had been trying to design something that like
targeted to you.
Yeah, exactly. Now, like this guy needs to watch something much more Netflix. So he's up there, but also, although it's different, I mean, it's a very different sort of thing what he does. Someone I really loved, I haven't read her in a long time, a woman named Fawn Brody, Brodib, who was a Mormon from not Salt Lake City, from a very distinguished Mormon family, who married a Jew and moved to California anyway, became an apostate. But she wrote this biography of Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet, that is an incredible book.
Oh, wow.
Because what she showed, I mean, she was totally canceled by the Mormons for 50 years. But she shows that Joseph Smith was basically a fraud.
Right.
Which we, you know, no offense to our LDS listeners here. But, you know, you could probably figure out that, like, that Jesus didn't write him a letter or whatever, you know, the story. Right. Like, there was a little bit of hocus pocus and thing. But what's so fascinating about it, what I kind of try to do as well, is that he becomes this enormously sympathetic figure because he gets caught in something that becomes bigger than he is. And so even though it's bullshit at first, it resonates with people. So it acquires this kind of truth, this religious or mystical truth. And then they're persecuted. You know, the early Mormons are persecuted and driven out of state after state and city after city, and they're killed and harassed. And as that happens, and then he's, of course, murdered. And as that happens, she shows how these stories that people tell, even if they don't necessarily believe them, become bigger than themselves, and how this kind of group of ragtag converts becomes a people. It's called No Man Knows My History, which is something that he said. And she was, of course, not a man, so no man, get it. But it's a fabulous book, and it shows, it really helped me understand Jewish history at a time that I was writing about Tradisi, actually. Yeah, if everybody had left the Jews alone, they would have disappeared thousands of years ago. I mean, look at all these ancient Mediterranean religions, the Mithraists, or whatever you call them, and the Carthaginians, and the people who worshipped
some gods,
the gods of Egypt. This is all gone, you know, and hundreds of more of these cults that we've never even heard of. Why are the Jews still around? And the only reason is that everybody hated them. And that was what happened to the Mormons. And then she got canceled also for writing a book that said Thomas Jefferson had black kids.
Gosh.
This was in the 70s.
Right.
It's completely, it almost cost her job.
Right.
She taught at UCLA. So she's somebody else.
An element of being quite courageous in revealing truths that people didn't necessarily want to hear, whether it was Mormons or Americans in general.
Yeah, but it comes back kind of what I was saying about when I started out as a writer. I didn't want to write the same book that everybody else wrote. So I always like the people who do something different. There's that great story at the very end of Why This World, where Clarice tells somebody that she walks down the Avenida Copacabana, which is this hellish, long, hot, packed street in Rio. And, you know, at 8 in the morning, everybody's going this way, and at 5 in the afternoon, they're going the other way. And she liked to go down there and walk the wrong way. just to like
be against the current.
Be against the current, and just to like cling to this individuality. And I thought that was so cool. I remember hearing that story and just thinking, like, no wonder I love you. That enough was,
that's what
I'd be
connected you to.
Even if she wasn't a genius, I would be into her.
Amazing. What are your upcoming projects? What are you working on, or what forms, whether they're biography or novels or essays, are you looking to work on these days?
Well, so I just downstairs, I'm working on this copy edited manuscript, which is really an exciting moment, because you think, there's a moment where I always think, when can I die when I'm writing a book? Like, you can't die at like 72%.
No, you can't trust the other 28%.
No, I mean, it's not done. It really isn't done. 82%, if you died, maybe. But I really feel like when you made it to the copy edited manuscript, like if I'm struck down this afternoon,
it's going out.
It's gonna, it's there, it's done. Maybe some spelling errors and whatever. It's about Dutch art. It's called The Upside Down World. Meetings with the Dutch Masters.
Wow.
Which is about my 20 years in this country, is seen through the Dutch painters.
So it's about you.
Yeah.
Commenting on Dutch culture and Dutch art through
really different. Not even that. It's more Dutch, the people themselves. I mean, because I am sort of coming from a biographical background, putting myself in it more. I think when you're a biographer, you're always wanting to talk more.
You'll be more visible.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the French writer Emmanuel Carrère?
Yeah, I love him.
I love him too.
Yeah.
And I think he does that quite successfully. He inserts himself into the stories. And then you're not quite sure whether it's the book's about him or about the subject.
Well, it's always about both, right? I mean, like the one he wrote about Limonov. Well, you know, when it came out, I remember this friend of mine here said, do you think it's interesting for the Dutch readers or whatever? And I said, because, you know, who knows who Limonov is and blah, that kind of thing, you know? And I thought, yeah, I mean, I get it. Like, nobody knows who this guy is. But what it really is a book that's written maybe 15 years ago, right?
Yes.
About Russian fascism and about the threat of this regime in Russia. But it's also him being obsessed with this kind of marginal character. And anyway, so I like that stuff. So I'm trying to write about my life in this country and my life, trying to kind of figure out what the hell it is and why am I here and who are these people? But like looking at it through art.
Wow.
So that's coming out in September.
Fantastic. Well, I really look forward to reading that. And then
it's fun. It's way less long.
Catch up then.
It's a lot shorter.
Oh, really? How long is it?
Well, it's like 92,000 words right now.
Okay.
Which for me is like a tweet. You know?
That is literally a tweet for you.
Yeah.
I just found out your Sontag book. I can confirm that.
Yeah, but I like it. I mean, I think one of the things when I came to this country, I really was fascinated by the art. I mean, if you come here and you go to the museums, you think, it's really an overwhelming experience. And so I kind of wrote the book that I wanted to read about it.
Fantastic. What's the best book that you've read this year?
Well, that is easy for me to answer. I've been rereading V.S. Naipaul, who was my great guru when I was a kid. And I just reread Away in the World, which I thought was just incredible.
Wow.
And I actually want to read it again. I hadn't read him in 20 years.
Wow. I haven't read him in, 10 years or so. Maybe it's...
Well, so you go back to it, as I have.
Away in the World.
Away in the World. And the breadth of his accomplishments, just the quality of those books, it's
inspirational.
It's inspirational. It's also terrifying. You know, it's also...
What's your favorite book that I have never heard of? Or that you think very few people have heard of?
Maybe No Man Knows My History by Fawn Brody. That's a great book.
The Mormon book.
The Mormon book.
No Man Knows.
Read it. No Man.
I had not heard of it, so it definitely.
No, I don't think it's, I mean, it's still in print, I think. If you want to understand what America is too. It's a fascinating book. And she's a great writer.
You're the dictator of a small country. What book do you make compulsory reading and why?
I guess it depends how small the country is. I just went to San Marino.
Oh, wow. That's pretty.
Are we thinking bigger than San Marino?
No, San Marino qualifies. What's the population of San Marino these days?
It's not that much.
20,000?
No, I think it's a little more than that. It's bigger than Monaco or than
is it?
the Vatican or those places.
Oh, okay.
It's quite beautiful too. Never been.
Never been.
See?
Never.
World is your oyster.
Wasn't there a thing about the leaders of San Marino being in trouble? There was a... No. Yeah.
Well, I follow this San Marinese Twitter account about political scandals there.
Okay.
And it's like somebody like didn't weigh their bananas in the grocery store. You know,
Oh, that's the one. Okay, I was thinking of
but apparently, I mean, there's been some shadiness. I'm not totally up on it. I don't know. Do they need a... So let's say I'm their dictator. Do dictators recommend books?
I'm thinking along the lines of, Gaddafi was forcing people to read his little green book, and then...
Yeah, or like the guy in Turkmenistan.
Like the guy in Turkmenistan, who you had to read the book to pass your driver's license.
Yeah, and it was like, it was flown into outer space.
Oh, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the first
book. Engines after free
into the galaxy.
Wow.
Yeah, maybe that's what I would do.
Yeah.
Just to fuck with everyone.
To send the book into space. But what book?
No, not send it into space. I would like maybe write some insane book about, and he was the one who named the months of the year after his mother and stuff, right? Turkmenbashi.
Yeah, Turkmenbashi.
Yeah, but the successor has kind of dialed it down. I guess if the question is what book should everybody read, I have no idea.
Fine.
People have such different tastes.
It's a pass. And then a good one for you as a biographer, what would be the title of your biography or autobiography?
Well, I was just in Lisbon. Didn't you live in Lisbon?
I was going to. In an alternative universe, I would be living in Lisbon. It's like my Chinese.
Yeah. No, because I think Atish said...
He last time we spoke, I was supposed to be living.
You were on your way?
I was on my way, and I got derailed. It was going to be Lisbon or Zurich, and it turned into London.
Oh.
Yeah.
I still think Lisbon's the best of those, though. Possibly.
Yes, maybe.
I love Lisbon.
I'm not going to look back on it.
Well, so I was walking around Lisbon. I was there for 48 hours. I just had a meeting there. So I went in, I left. And I was listening to
Sorry, out of curiosity, who were you meeting?
I was meeting the president of the Gulbenkian Foundation.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. Well, that's an amazing museum.
Amazing.
I was asking that question just because I was in Lisbon about a month ago and met the whole team from Penguin. And
Who's that?
And the lady who runs Penguin in Portugal is somebody called Clara Capitan.
Yeah, I know her.
So I was hanging out with her. And then I know that Clarice Lispector's books are published through Penguin, so I figured maybe...
Well, they're not. My books are published there. Her books are at this other place. Unfortunately, I'd love them to be at Penguin.
No, but the edition I read of Hour of the Star was a Penguin Cleansing.
Penguin in the UK.
Penguin in the UK.
Yeah.
Okay.
Penguin in Portugal is...
Yeah, a different...
I mean, it's the same Penguin, but they
might not necessarily have the rights.
No, it's every country is different.
Yeah.
No, they don't. I'd love them to have that. But she has a good publisher in Portugal, and she's present in all the bookstores. So that's already a
good achievement.
Battle.
A win.
Oh, so I was walking around the Bible Aisle. I had a dinner that got canceled, not because of COVID, but because of general sickness among the party.
Flu-like symptoms.
What?
Flu-like symptoms.
Flu-like symptoms. And I was listening to... So instead of going to the Fado, I was just listening to Fado and just feeling my sort of romance with Portugal, which is just a fabulous country that I love. And I listened to a song by Amália Rodrigues called Gostava de Ser Quem Era. Do you know Portuguese?
No.
Gostava de Ser Quem Era. It's a beautiful song about a little girl. And it says, and it means I liked being who I was, which I thought was so sad because, adults don't really like being who they are usually. I mean, some do. maybe the more boring people. But I thought that'd be a wonderful title if you could say that about yourself. I liked being who I was.
That would be the title
Yeah.
of your autobiography.
Yeah.
Wonderful title.
Yeah, and I do. I think I am happy with my life. I
Fantastic.
feel very lucky.
Brilliant. Ben, thank you so much.
Sure.
It was brilliant to speak to you, and what a pleasure it was to...
Same here. Thanks for coming all this way.
Well, thanks for having me.